I think that's all my housekeeping done. Okay, so welcome to day 2. I hope everyone enjoyed the gala dinner. It was a lovely venue. So we're starting off today with our third keynote, Sheila MacNeill. Sheila's currently the Senior Lecturer at Glasgow Caledonian. I'm sure if you work in UK Ed Tech, most of you know Sheila. She was Assistant Director at CETIS, and she led on many influential programs. She's also one of the key people to follow on Twitter, I think, and her blog is always a joy to read. I think, as with the other speakers, when we kind of came up with the choice of the theme, Sheila was kind of a really obvious choice for me about mainstreaming OER. One of the things I kind of really admire about Sheila is kind of this ability to avoid hype, kind of either on the plus or negative side about particular new technology developments. So whether it's MOOCs, learning analytics, learning design, or digital badges, I think a key question you can always carry in your head when you're thinking about these things is like, what would Sheila think? Because that's a pretty good path to follow. So Sheila's been doing great work in open education for many years, and she's been blogging about the talk she's going to give today, and that's already generated loads of great conversations. So go to her blog and have a look at that. And I'm really looking forward to talk. So please welcome Sheila MacNeill.
Morning, everybody. Thanks, Martin, for that. I'm going to try and stand in front of the mic. Well, thank you. I'm really delighted to be here in Cardiff. This is my first OER conference, and it's been great. It's been a blast. So thank you to Hayden and Martin and the conference organisers. It's just been great. And also today, I just want to say a special thank you to Debbie Bath, who's not here today, but just Debbie, we're thinking of you. So as you know, the theme of this conference is mainstreaming. So I'm someone who works in the mainstream. I thought this would be a perfect for me to take some time and air my open washing. And open washing, I know, is something that's been talked about quite a bit yesterday, so I'm going to explore that in the safety of my this lovely open community. So when Martin asked me to do the keynote, I was kind of taken aback because I don't know how many of you were Alt-C last year. Quick show of hands, there was a few people. So I think there were a couple of keynotes there that kind of raised the bar. I know we had some excellent keynotes here yesterday as well. But Catherine Cronin, who's here today, and Audrey Waters, they did a couple of fantastic keynotes, and probably two of the best that I've ever been to. And I was kind of like saying to Martin, I was like, you want me to do a great keynote? And we've just seen those people? Anyway, we had a talk about it, and one of the key things that I think came out of Catherine and Audrey's presentation at Alt was the need to have authentic voices and authentic narratives to tell our story, and not just about educational technology, but about learning in general. And I think for openness, that's very true. So we had a chat, and I thought, well, actually, my story, my narrative, is just as worthy as anybody else's to share. So it's unashamedly from a Scottish HE UK perspective. That's where I work. That's my mainstream, if you like. And I'm not coming from one of the big or one of the ancient or one of the curve institutions. I'm coming from somewhere which is probably about as middle of the mainstream as you can get. So I hope that you'll enjoy my presentation today. I hope some of the things that I'm going to talk about mainstreaming resonate with you. And together we can explore some of the themes that came up yesterday, particularly around awareness and practice. So after a great take the gig, as they say, a couple of things sprang to mind. And the first one was this phrase, don't panic. Now, those of you who work in mainstream education, if you're like me, you probably find you say that quite a lot. Don't panic is kind of a key phrase for me in my life. But, and obviously, when you think of don't panic, you obviously think of the late, great Douglas Adams. And I tend to find that there's always a quote from Douglas Adams that kind of fits into any kind of social situation, which is quite good. It's always it's also a very useful place to start when thinking about titles for presentations. It might be a bit cliched. So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, oh, great, I know what I can do. I can call it something like The Hitchhiker's Guide to OER, and I can talk about, you know, my kind of travels from planet innovation to planet mainstream, and it'll be great, it'll be heartwarming, it'll be insightful, it'll be funny, it'll be, you know, what could possibly go wrong? So I started thinking about it a bit more, and it's like, well, you know, there's all these characters, so who would I be in this fascinating tale of OER? Would I be, you know, Arthur Dent, a sort of female Arthur Dent in my dressing gown? towel being pulled around I don't know. And then I kind of thought, well, who would be my Ford prefect? You know, who would be Zaphod? Obviously, Josie would be Trillian, but, you know, there's all these things that we have to think about. And then the more I thought about it, actually, I thought, well, do you know what? I'm just going to end up being Marvin, the depressed robot, because I'll just end up saying in a monotone voice, yeah, but back in the real world, we have to do it this way. But I thought, no, I'd keep going with it. There's got to be something in this. And I thought, well, the Vogons, fantastic, because there's so many people we could draw analogies with. They could be like the venture capitalists who are just coming in with their evil openness, and they're just destroying our wonderful, lovely, caring, sharing OER community just at the point that it started to get interesting. And I thought, but also the kind of Vogons, they really like their bureaucracy and administration, and if you work in mainstream, you know, we do have to go through a lot of committees, we do have to sign a lot of documents. And I was like, well, that's another thing. And then I thought, you maybe should stop this now, Sheila, before you actually get into really dodgy territory and you end up getting sued. So I thought, no, we won't do that. So then another tale came to mind, and there was something about this that really appealed to me, so I thought I'll stick with this. It was Alice in Wonderland. And it wasn't because there was a cast of crazy characters, because there are, but it wasn't for that. And it wasn't about going down the rabbit hole, though we could obviously draw analogies with that. It was really about a pivotal moment for me in kind of my openness. And it was that kind of eat me, drink me moment. Now, yeah, I know that I've kind of taken a lot of liberties there with the cupcake, but I think if Lewis Carroll had been around just now, he would have had a cupcake, not biscuits. You know, definitely, they would have been there. And I think when you start to think about openness, and when you take a bite of the open cake, it's amazing. It's an amazing experience. Suddenly you feel you're connecting with this big open world. You're meeting people and doing things that you never thought you could. And, you know, it's a great feeling, and it's really, really exciting. And it's one of the most exciting aspects about open education. And you become part of this lovely swirly, twirly mass of goodness and openness. And I suspect many of us have had that, you know, that lovely, warm, egotistical feeling when you find yourself in one of Martin's lovely Tags Explorer visualizations. It's great. We all feel, wow, look, there's me. That's fantastic. But conversely, if you take a drop or two of the open juice, you can actually start to feel very, very small and insignificant. And how can I possibly make my voice be heard in this vortex of openness and people that know each other and connected? And that's the scary part of open. And I think that's the really thing that we have to think about in the mainstream education. And I know I've had those feelings of isolation and loneliness, particularly in open online learning, and it can be quite scary. So yeah, that's something I think we really have to think about in the mainstream. And I think that many of our colleagues and many of our senior management, people in our senior management team, they tend to think of things still from the eat me point of view. They still think if they do things in the open, they'll suddenly become huge and everybody will be looking at everything that they do and the whole world will be looking at them. And it's not quite like that, so I think they kind of sometimes think that the risks are a lot higher than they are. And of course, with everything, there's a balance to be struck. So deciding how open you want to be as an individual and as an institution, you have to think about the same things. And thinking about how open you want to be and indeed how open you can be takes time. And it's a constantly shifting balancing act as well. And of course, balance requires flexibility. And I know in my life and in my practice, I'm pretty flexible about my approach. So for example, today, I've created my slide deck today using Haiku Deck. One of the reasons, well, a couple of reasons for doing that. One of them was I just wanted to have a play with it. And the other reason was because you can search for Creative Commons licensed images, which is a really, really handy thing to do. So I know that the images that I'm using are properly Creative Commons licensed, or they're my own images, which I've put in Flickr and I've put a CC license in, or indeed there's some of my own drawings, which again I've put on Flickr and I've shared through a CC license. So I've done that. I've also created, well, I started creating a list. I used a service called Listly of just kind of interesting things for this talk. So that's kind of built up to my reference list, if you want. And I tweeted that out earlier. So a lot of things I'm going to talk about today are in that list. A lot of things that I'm not going to talk about today, or I'll forget to talk about, are in that list as well. But they're open to an extent, and when you start looking at all these tools, they're maybe not as open as we would like them to be. And I think, that's what I want to look at a bit more. And so, as they say, the open washing begins. So, as part of today, I had been really looking about this whole notion of open washing, because I think it's particularly relevant for those of us working in the mainstream. And of course, when you think about open washing, and I know Cable alluded to this yesterday in his talk as well, you have to think about the greenwashing movement. And the definition that Cable gave yesterday from Audrey Waters is very good. But I think the definition from the greenwashing site, you just need to change environmental to open, and it still stands. So it's the act of misleading consumers regarding the environmental practices of a company or the environmental benefits of a product or service. So I think we can definitely see that happens with openness. And I blogged about this last week, and I think there's obvious comparisons with open education, and particularly with their sins, the 7 sins of greenwashing. But I have to say, I'm very, very wary of using that kind of emotive religious language about mainstream education, because I think there's a very fine line that you have to draw between being an evangelist or an early adopter and being that person that when people see you, they're like, don't look at them, they're going to talk about open, I don't have the time to do it. So there's a very fine line, and we all know that person. We've probably all been that person, or we have someone like that in our institution. So we have to be careful about that. And whilst when we look at them, there are a lot of these sins that I absolutely hold no truck with. There are a couple that I want to explore a bit more. So vagueness, fibbing, and irrelevance, that. And again, it was really great from the presentations yesterday, and Cable highlighted this in his presentation as well. We have a growing evidence. We have growing evidence and proof of openness now, which is fantastic. And you all here at the conference are adding to that body of evidence. Of course, we need more, but we now are in a position when you're in mainstream that when people ask you, well, so why do we want to do this open thing? What difference will it make? We actually have got some evidence that we can give our senior management, and that's really important. So we've got that evidence increasingly about the impact and the cost benefit of openness, but we need more. But I'm keeping the worshipping false labels, the lesser of two evils, and the hidden trade-off out of the bin just now. Because in mainstream education, and actually in mainstream life, we have to deal with that. We have to make trade-offs every day. I know I do it every day, just to get a bit of open into a conversation or into a part of a project. Some of you may have been at my lightning presentation yesterday. I talked about a development we ran last year in conjunction with the Commonwealth Games. We ran an open online event called GCU Games On, and it was open in many senses of the word open. We did reuse some properly openly licensed content. I think David Walker is there. We used your 10 Days of Twitter guide, which had been repurposed from the original 10 Days of Twitter, which was from CC licensed. That was great. We used an open platform, but it was only open to us because we pay a lot of money to use their other not open platform. And I could go on and on about the other things that we used. But there was a huge trade-off for us in doing that. And the first that taking that very pragmatic approach and using tools that we were familiar with meant that we were able to do something very quickly and get it online incredibly quickly. So in under a month, we had something from a bit of paper to a full-blown course that was ready for people to sign up to and take part in. But the biggest trade-off that we had was because we were doing things openly and because we were being quite agile, we got and we kept the attention of our then PVC for learning and teaching, and we got openness being discussed in a way that we hadn't done before. And it was quite accidental, but it was a real opportunity, and we took that. And that trade-off was really worth it. So I'm not going to stand up here and ask to be ask for forgiveness for any kind of sin, because in my context, the end was just the means absolutely justified the ends. And, you know, in my context, it worked. And I think context is absolutely critical in any situation. Years ago, back in the days of learning objects, when they were going to save the world and, you know, revolutionize and disrupt education, I was at a conference and Stephen Heppel said, if context is king, then context is majesty. And I don't know why more people don't say that, because I think it's absolutely true. Our context is absolutely crucial. So if we think about our mainstream educational context, where does openness sit, and where would we start to think about that in terms of our context and our needs? And I thought, well, let's have a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think when you start looking at that, it's very easy to make some nice correlations with openness, particularly at the top of the pyramid around self-actualization and esteem. On an individual level and on an institutional level, we can easily make connections with openness there. And whilst we might laugh now, because it seems to be that Wi-Fi is now the de facto additional layer to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we can't, I mean, how many of us could have functioned at this conference without Wi-Fi? But I think it's quite timely maybe to think about where openness fits in this. And should openness be a distinct layer in this pyramid? Or is it something that actually is subsumed into all of these layers? I don't know. I think it's something we need to look at. So we also need to think about what mainstreaming is as well. And I was looking for a definition of mainstream, and this is from Wikipedia, and I thought this is actually quite a good one. Generally, the common current thought of the majority. So if we're talking about our needs and our drivers and our we go to find out the current common thoughts of the majority. Well, we go to ALT in the UK, of course. And if we have a look at last year's, the 2014 ALT survey, this is one of, I just have to show some of Martin's graphs here. Fun making them. So this kind of shows some of the key drivers for educational technology, and I think that's probably a good place to look for anything around about openness. But if we look at it in a bit more detail, openness in terms of the current drivers and the increasingly important one, it's not on the top list at all. It's not anywhere near the top. It's great to see that it's increasingly important and it's being identified as being increasingly important, but it's not at the top. And it's not spoken about in the same breath as many of the other things. And I don't very often hear people talking about assessment and openness in the same breath in my institution. So for our mainstream practice, there's a lot of work that we have to do around openness. And this is just one view of mainstream in terms of competing priorities. There's things like the NSS as well. Where's openness in that? So there's a lot of things that we need to think about. And I know my own institution, we've just recently finished a survey with our staff, and we've used the ALT survey kind of as a baseline for that, so we've used some similar questions. So the situation there is probably slightly more depressing, actually, but openness is there, but it's certainly not high up in people's priorities just now. But I do know anecdotally in my own institution that I think we are moving forward. Certainly when I started about a year and a half, going around talking to staff and asking people about, do you use open educational resources? Do you share? I was met with a kind of a shake of the head. Normally I just got a blank look from a lot of pieces. So people are actually talking about openness, or maybe actually they're going, oh my God, there's that woman that's going to ask me about openness. Run away now. But I think on a kind of a more positive note, I think there's lots of things that we can do and that we can leverage open in a lot of these priorities. And leveraging is another one of those words that is really key to us in the mainstream. So my context for online and delivery, that's certainly a driver just now. So we're using that to drive and try and improve and get people to think more about openness as well. So that's one way where we can get some information about what the current thought of the majority is. But I thought, as Martin said, I've been doing a bit of blogging in preparation for this keynote. So I thought, well, I know how I kind of think about mainstreaming, but I thought I would just ask people. So I wrote a little blog post in February and I asked people, how do you mainstream? And I have to say, I was absolutely overwhelmed by the response I got. So I know a number of people who responded to that are in the room today, so thank you very much for that. It was great. Yeah, the wisdom of the crowd is fantastic, but at this point I have to make give a special mention to Pat Lockley, because Pat kind of single-handedly went into the comments debate and made some fantastic contributions. But that was really, really interesting. Whilst I urge you all to go and have a look at the comments, don't read the post, just look at the comments. It's a really interesting discussion. I'll try and sort of share what I took away from it as well. So the first thing I thought to do, there was a lot of comments, I thought, well, I'll just maybe do a quick Wordle, because sometimes that's quite crude, but it gives you an overview of what people are talking about. Well, it didn't really, it's quite nice, but that doesn't really tell you anything apart from open, which I would have expected anyway. So I thought, well, I'll try and be a little bit clever, and I'll try and do some text analysis. So I got a nice swirly-twirly, but it didn't really help. And I think all that diagram really showed me was how interrelated and how complicated the people and the thoughts that we were talking about were. But one of the things that did strike me from the discussion was that there seemed to be a tension between open educational resources and open educational practice, which kind of surprised me. And the conversation seemed to drift. I had asked people to tell me how they mainstreamed, and I did get some really fantastic examples of that, so thank you. But the conversation did tend to drift more to the why. And I think that's maybe a reflection of where we are. So we've got some people who are doing stuff, and some people are actually still wanting to question why we do open as well, and both are equally valid. So on the one hand, there was definitely a strong advocacy for clarity and rigor around licensing and content. And then on the other hand, you had sort of more of people saying, well, I really want to be creative, I want to use openness for experimentation. And I think we need a bit of both, obviously. But I think from my point of view just now, I'm probably more in that kind of experimentation and extending practice more than really concentrating about content too much. And again, that's my context, because I tend to work with people and we're building activities. So content is not actually my main focus, but open educational practice is a huge part of my practice. And I think education, as we all know, is more than resources, it's more than content. So again, referring to context as majesty. And I certainly want our students and our staff to be open practitioners, and I want them to be able to express themselves and to be able to interact appropriately and openly, and not just be consumers of content, because I think we have to be realistic. Not everybody is going to create and share content. That's just not going to happen. We know that. It's only a tiny percentage of the population, of any population, will actually create and share. We want people to reuse, but I think we have to be realistic about what people are going to do. But we want people to be able to obviously understand licensing and to also in the presentation, and this isn't a typo, this is my I am Spartacus moment. I am OER. Tony Hurst made a fantastic contribution to the discussion, and Cable again alluded to that yesterday in his presentation. And Tony again, he said, well, he'd been thinking about his own personal development and how he'd realised that he was an open educational resource. And I think that's so true, and we forget about that. We're all open educational resources, and we're the most effective and we're the best open educational resources that our institutions and indeed our society have. So I think what we really need to do in the mainstream is to think about that more and start recognising that and identifying ourselves as open educational practitioners. I know in the last 2 years I've very much started to do that. It's my name, it's my institution, and then I'm an open practitioner. And I guess most of you in this room, because you're at this conference, do the same thing. And if you don't, I would urge you to very publicly say that you're an open practitioner, and think about trying to encourage your colleagues who are maybe not at this conference and who are more in the mainstream to think about doing that. Because I think once we get people identifying themselves as open educational practitioners, then we really start making some inroads into the mainstream as well. So this is the point where I want to talk about the battle and the battle conundrum. And I think it's fair to say that Martin and I have a good-natured difference opinion about this, the battle metaphor. I think one of my main issues with it is that where I'm coming from, it doesn't really matter who's won or who's lost this battle, because most of the people I work with don't even know that it's been fought. They just don't have a clue. so it doesn't really matter. And I think Martin has, taken account of this, and the title of the book where he says, openness while we've won, and it doesn't feel like victory. And again, just to plug Martin's book, it's a great read, and I think it really does summarise where we are in the sector in all sorts of openness. So yeah, do read the book. Is that okay, Martin? Yeah, okay. Yeah, we have to worry about winning battles and wars, and I think if we look, particularly just now, if we look at UK politics, we have a really good example of a battle being won in Scotland, but I think the UK political establishment have been quite surprised that although it's a so-called battle, then the war they certainly haven't won, but that's a whole other keynote in there, so I won't go on that. But I think my other main problem with the battle analogy, and the thing I really want to talk about, and mainstream education, is this. Now, I love my job. I have to say, I really love my job. I love the people I work with. I love going to work. But when you work in the mainstream, it's really, it can be tough because you have to go over the same things again and again and again and again. And I could add a couple of agains as well. So you have to be, that can be quite time consuming. So I honestly don't have the energy to take on another battle. I just don't have the energy to fight every single day because I have enough to do. So it's not to say that I'm not ready to fight, as Josie and Martin know. Take my butter knife away from me. Oh boy, you're in trouble. Sorry, but I am absolutely ready to fight for what is right. But I have to choose my battles very, very carefully. And mainstreaming is very much about pragmatism, and it's about patience, and it's about the long haul. So whilst I'll take small victories as and when I can, I have to work and think about the wider context and the strategic aims and how I can fit things in, and how I can really start making a difference and do things that I don't have to go over again and again and again with people. So I want to take us away from this whole battle analogy, and I want to take you to what I'm going to call my ha-ha moment. Now, the reason I've put this in, because I thought, well, if it's all going a bit wrong, if I put that up, maybe somebody will take a picture or they'll tweet, and at least they'll think there's some kind of joke, or it's all quite funny. But really, what I want to do, I want to talk about landscape gardening. And can I just ask, how many people know what a ha-ha is? A few people, yeah, it's a ha, it's the ditch, yeah. So usually, and it's for those of you who don't know, but obviously you're so educated anyway, this audience. I knew I had a good crowd. I knew you would know this. Ha-ha is a device that's used to create views in usually large country parks. So it was sort of pioneered by some of the early landscape gardeners, people like Capability Brown, when they were working in large country estates and they were making these lovely pastoral views. This is from Wikipedia. Obviously, all the links are here. I thought they had the best drawing of a ha-ha here. So you'd have sheep and landscape and probably a couple of peasants way off in the distance. And you wanted to see them, but you didn't want to have any kind of livestock getting into or near to the sort of closer to the big house or to the more delicate areas of the garden. So you'd have this ditch to stop that, and it's creates a nice view. And I think when you think about it, our universities, our education establishments, they're actually quite like large country estates in lots of ways. They generally sit within pretty extensive physical and increasingly digital spaces. And our senior managers, they sit in their offices and they peruse their estate. And I think you could say that there probably is quite a large metaphorical ha-ha between them and us sometimes. And I know working in the mainstream, I sometimes feel that I'm in a bit of that ditch and people are just kind of see how hard and what all the work that goes on to create this lovely vista in front of them. And I think this brings me to probably a key point we haven't really talked about, and that's about the cost of opening. And maintaining any kind of estate has a cost. And as we all know, open isn't free. And that has huge implications for mainstreaming and its impact on mainstream education. So we have some institutions have a lot of money and they can tend their garden and they can create open areas and they can subsume some of their current activities. And they can do that pretty easily because they've got the money to do it. Others just now, and I think we see this particularly, we've seen this with MOOCs, they seem to, I think they might be even selling the family silver to keep up because they're spending vast amounts of money on openness. Parts of openness. Others, like my institution, don't have that kind of money. And our priorities and the way that our garden is growing, if you like, is quite different. And we have other senior management who are actually not interested in gardening. They seem to be more interested in interior design at the moment. And if you want to know any more about that, just look at the Sunday Herald. I think thinking on my practice, I had benefited tremendously for being in a really luxurious position to develop my open practice. When I was working for CETIS, we were a nationally funded organisation. I was fully supported to be open. I was encouraged to blog, to share, and do things. And you know, it took a number of years for me to become the open practitioner that I am, but I had the time and the space to do it. Not many of my colleagues in mainstream education have that luxury just now. If you speak to any lecturer, they have a lot of pressures on their time, so we have to think about that. And if we're asking people to take another thing into what they're doing into their practice, if we don't have some payoff for them, it's very, very difficult. And I think, you know, in the UK, since the GIST higher education OER funding, there's not been an awful lot of funding specifically for open projects for people. So if you don't have money in your institution, to get that little bit of time to buy out some time to do something around open is increasingly difficult. And I'm kind of saddened in some ways because I think we are in danger of maybe creating another open silo where it's only the people who can afford to be open that are going to be open. And it's only those and such of those that will be able to apply for any funding that is available. And I think that's really sad because that's not mainstreaming, and I don't think we want another silo like that. However, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. It's a nice country park there. I want to introduce you to the guerrilla garden. So just like we have guerrilla research, which I know Martin talks about a lot, I think we can have guerrilla educational development as well. This picture is of a bit, it's actually an old disused football pitch just around the corner where I live in Glasgow, which wasn't used for many, many years, and there were some kind of recreational activities happening there, but probably not the kind of things that you want to do. It was, you don't really want to know what happened there. Anyway, the community have started to take this over, and you know, it's great. There's raised vegetable patches, there's some nice spring flowers, there's things that happen there in the summer. It's called the North Kelvinside Meadow, and if you know that part of Glasgow at all, even the notion of having a meadow there is quite interesting. But it's great to see that kind of community taking over those kind of spaces. And I think we can do that the same within education. Looking at those kind of more bottom-up approaches where things take root before people actually realise it. What we did with Games On, I've described that as a guerrilla development. The development of our OER guidelines that Marion Kelt, I'm not sure if she's here this morning, she's probably here somewhere, that Marion Kelt has been doing. You know, that's kind of just guerrilla. We've just gone ahead and we've just done that. So I think everyone can do that, and we want to maybe encourage a bit more of that behaviour. We can also, you know, not everyone can have a vast estate, and we might want to think about the idea of kind of window boxes or pots. I don't have a garden, but I have a little bit of space where I have some pots outside my flat. So if we can encourage our staff and our students just to have a little patch of openness that they can tend and can kind of get the open bug, then hopefully that will encourage them to do more in openness and to take over more formal and informal learning spaces as well. But I can't talk about gardening and education without talking about gardens. This is a walled garden. It's on the island of Islay, where my mum lives, in quite a small estate. But they open up the gardens, I think about twice a year to people, for people to go and have a look at it. Now, it's quite windy. It's not the windiest of the islands, but it's quite windy. So, you know, you need some walls, particularly for delicate plants, to nurture them, to help them grow. And some of these plants will be put outside into the garden, and others will always stay there. And I think that's the same in education. We have a duty of care to our staff and to our students to provide them with secure places where they can develop their skills, their digital capabilities. So we need our walled gardens in our institutions, and places where we can help staff and students develop their digital capabilities so that they're making the decisions as to how, when and why they interact openly, and they really understand that. So this is kind of one of those open paradoxes. So while I'm standing up here and saying, yeah, look at me, I'm an open practitioner, I fully recognise the need for closed spaces within our education system as well. So I think we're doing okay for time. So I just want to finish with this thought. I think we can be open anywhere. This is a picture of the Highline Garden in New York. I don't know if any of you've been there, but it's just the most amazing space. You know, a derelict railway line that is just there's so many things happen there. There's a theatre, there's art, there's soundscapes, it's everything. And I'm sure the people that lived in New York never ever dreamed that derelict railway line could just be such a vibrant, creative space. And I think that's the same in our education system. There's a lot that we can do, and we can create fantastic things through openness. But we have to be flexible, and we have to accept a bit of open washing, and we have to look for the trade-offs, and we have to try and do that and support people in their journey to becoming more open practitioners. So on that thought, I will leave you. Thank you very much. Oh, God, did you? Do you want to know what's in the bag? Oh, I can't tell you.
So we've got about...
Oh, no. Now you know what's in the bag.
What was in We've got about 10 minutes for questions, and that gives us time to get to a slot. So there are mics around if people have... Is that Paul?
Yeah.
Congratulations on that talk. That was excellent, and makes one think of lots of things. I'm thinking particularly, especially in Wales, where they have a grand tradition of government support for e-learning, unlike some parts of our still United Kingdom. The issue of this, a question I raised some informally yesterday, the issue of the synergy between in the battle for open, who are the allies of open? And in particular, especially with reference to all parts of the UK, are the e-learning mob the allies of open? Are they the same people? In what way are they different people? And are there some tensions within that? Because I do see some factions with it, straddling both communities, as a number of us do. I do see some factions there, and not always a commonality of interest, which seems to me a bit worrying, because in some sense the e-learning should be the shock troops, or should have been the shock troops. So there's some interesting tensions here, and I think from your perspective I'd be very interested in the answer, and others would be too.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there are natural allies, the e-learning people, I think definitely. I think you look at learning technology units in mainstream education, that's usually the people that are trying new things. So yeah, there should be, they are our obvious allies. I think what I found going back into mainstream, if you like, from being in this fantastic, crazy world where, I wasn't involved, say, as much as Lorna and colleagues in the OER projects themselves, but I certainly knew about them. But I think it's just the lack of awareness, and I know Cable and Josie talked about that. There's just a lack of awareness about openness because it doesn't really fit into people's key priorities, and we don't have enough people in senior management positions that are driving that yet. I think in terms of learning technology, we're getting to a point where we have more people now in senior positions who can really bring about change, and they actually know what they're talking about, so that that is making a huge difference to a lot of institutions. And I think we've probably got a way to go with that in openness. I think it's starting to happen, but I think it goes back to this, actually, we all need to think about ourselves as open practitioners and see that we are open educational resources. And I think there's always this tension between product and platform and people and process. And I think that's very much in this community as well. And it's like, well, I'm going to do this open thing. Do I have to buy something? And it's actually, well, no. It's like we all know to do anything in education. It's not really what you buy, the technology that you buy. It's the people that are going to implement it, and we have to work on the people. So I think it's awareness raising that's important.
Hi, Sheila. Nick Shepherd from Leeds Beckett University. Thanks for the talk. I've worked historically in both open access research and open education. People are probably aware there's an awful lot going on at the moment in open access with the HEFGE mandates, etc. And ironically, that seems to be sort of, I don't know, taken away from the open education stuff, really. You know, there's the mandates and all the rest of it. I mean, I'd be interested in your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that was, I deliberately didn't talk about that in my talk because it's not something that I have a huge amount of experience with, and I'm probably not the best qualified person to deal with that. But yeah, from an outside kind of vested interest point of view, I think, yeah, it's kind of those drivers. It's, we get so far, and that I think, I'm probably not going to make any sense at all because I haven't got notes written down from the questions. I think it's this tension about, this is maybe where open washing gets quite dangerous. And although I'm kind of in a kind of jokey way saying, you know, we can't maybe have to live with a bit of open washing, when it does get kind of serious and we're getting into policy, we need to make sure that we have people who really know what they're talking about and really understand the implications of what they're doing. So this is probably a total cop-out, Nick. I really don't know how to answer your question properly, sorry. Probably other people do.
Interestingly, I work across that interface because for the last 2 years of our institution, I picked up providing access in addition to the learning and teaching. And a year ago, at the Forum for Access and Continuing Education, which is the main widening access conference across the UK, there was nothing in that domain. One was kind of all missing. This year, when the conference is being held again at our university, and for my sins, I'm co-chairing that one too, I'm seeing about 50% of the abstracts with open in our sense being aligned with open in the sense of access. So I do think that community, who wasn't particularly familiar with what's going on in the EdTech or the wider open education community, are starting to be so. And I know one of the workshops I'm going to in the next section actually got an abstract very similar to that conference, with exactly that dynamic. So I hope if they're not there yet, that they will be getting there with the high.
Yeah, I think that's true. And we're all kind of, I think, going back to Paul's question, none of our, the EdTech community and the open community, we're not really mainstream yet. We're getting there a bit with the technology, but it's not. We're not mainstream. I mean, I'm still seeing, and our unit are still seeing, we're not really, people only come to us when they really have a problem. So we actually don't know often what people are doing either. So it's difficult to know what really is happening in the mainstream.
I think there's a Marion first and then...
It's Marion Deepwell from the Association for Learning Technology. Sheila, I loved your talk, and while I agree with you with the challenges that we have, they're not small, it's left me really inspired. And yesterday, Cable ended his keynote by telling us what Cable Green would like to see happen. And I wonder, as an open practitioner, is there a takeaway for you, what you would like to see happen for you from a personal perspective?
I mean, I think Cable had some really pragmatic and useful solutions to use in mainstreaming. I think for me, the key thing that I would like is more senior management support for doing things, for them to really understand about openness, and not in a MOOC context, but really understand what open education and open educational resources can do for the university and for the institution. And that's what I would really like. So I would like to see us being able to have these kind of conversations at a much higher level. And because I'm only a senior lecturer, I don't get to speak to the bosses very often. I don't have much clout. I don't have any clout in my institution.
Hi, Vashti Zarek, Bangor University Library. I love the keynote, lots of great points, particularly the stuff about time and costs for academics. I particularly loved your point about guerrilla gardening, and I was thinking that in the context of the changes to higher education, do you think that's also very much a point for how important it is to encourage lots of small, innovative, unique styles and approaches to OER and not just end up with large, bland, sort of more commodified, branded OERs and MOOCs?
Yes, ideally, I think that's just now where we can do things. If you get people that are interested, and this is just from my point of view, if you can do something small with them, you can really have quite an instant impact. Again, it goes back to your context. I think you have to do a balancing act because we're trying to get things higher up into strategy and policy, because I think there are certain things that you can do if you think about it at a strategic level that makes those kind of small projects easier to do as well. So I think it's a balancing act just now. Where I'm sitting, I'm kind of more in the kind of guerrilla side of things because it's just where I am. But, you know, I would love to see more thought being given at kind of our strategy level to how we can start really thinking about our whole infrastructure and how we can make openness just yet another part of things that people do in their day-to-day lives, and it's not a huge barrier. It's not something that they're scared of.
Was it Dominic, and then we'll wrap up. By the way, that's guerrilla as in warfare, not gorilla as in big ape, because I think some people get confused.
Thank you. Dominic Blish, tech check on Twitter, and my Twitter profile now says I am an open education practitioner. So thank you for the inspiration. My sort of question or comment is, because you're talking a lot about senior management in higher education, but what about sort of doing outreach? It doesn't have to be on those levels that with senior academics. You know, people like Martin, who has laudably done a lot to sort of model good practice, but you know, there's lots of people who keep publishing books in closed ways. They don't get anything out of it anymore. They don't need the prestige. They don't get any money. So you know, even if they needed it, so you know, why not reach out to them and say, let's you know, publish the next big book on whatever as an openly licensed book. And you know, but perhaps it would take a lot of the people in this room and you know, to go out and start doing a lot of outreach and sort of a personal conviction, personal influence spreading.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's happening. I think that's starting to happen. You know, I think a lot more people are doing things openly. There's a lot more collaboration that's happening. And, you know, I know when I'm asked to do things now, one of the first things I ask is it going to be openly available, you know, because I'm going to write something, and I don't write books or anything like that, but I've a couple of book chapters, most recent book chapters have all been CC licensed as well, and that's been quite crucial in me deciding whether or not to take part in that project. So I think it is happening.
Okay. I just want to say thanks for an amazing keynote, Sheila. I'm so glad you said yes. That's really good. So just gives you another round of applause. You can head off to your next session.